Thank you so much for joining this interview. I'm really excited to talk. For those who don't know, kind of what's your name and like what do you do?
Sure. My name is Dr. Eric Bender, and I'm a psychiatrist and psychotherapist in San Francisco. I see children, teenagers, adults, and couples in psychotherapy. Even though I'm a psychiatrist and I can prescribe medication, I choose to focus on the psychotherapy world. So I see people in that way.
That's awesome. Thank you. I'm really excited to talk about different superheroes and kind of how we can relate to their experiences and what they're going through.
Sure.
So I want to start off with Batman.
That's a good one to start with. Yes. And I should add, too, you'd asked me what else I do. I do a lot of work with media. So I look at pop culture, TV shows, video games, movies, you name it, and kind of put them on the couch looking at what can we learn and what are the psychological themes or why characters might be driven to do what they do. I had a chance to consult on the Batman Arkham Shadow video game and add psychological depth to the characters there. And the team that put that game out, Camouflage, they got VR Game of the Year. And they really wanted to do this in a good way, looking at how can these characters, how can we understand them in a way that makes them accessible to us. And we're doing this in an accurate way and really adding to the storylines. I think they've done a good job with that. And so I really enjoy looking at characters that way because I feel like people can look at mental health and not be scared by it. It can start a conversation. So starting with Batman is a great place to start. So Batman is well known, universally known figure. Bruce Wayne as a child was very scared one day when he fell into a well. If we look at the Batman Begins, Christopher Nolan's first Batman movie, young Bruce Wayne fell into a well and was terrified by these bats flying all over the caves that the well led down into. His father ended up bringing him up, and he was really terrified by this, really traumatized. In that storyline, later, the family went to the opera. Bruce was very scared in the dark, and he wanted to leave. And as he left with his parents, leaving the opera early, his parents were murdered by Joe Chill in Crime Alley. And forever, Bruce lived with a feeling of shame, a feeling of guilt, and a feeling of fear that he had caused this and that he should have been braver and his parents would still be alive. So I think everybody can relate to having had some trauma or tragedy or something in their lives that has really altered how they live their life. I also think that many people have had moments of feeling like they were scared and maybe they caused a problem for people. So I think there are a lot of themes that we can relate to with Batman. In addition, what's interesting about Batman, I mean, there's so much to talk about here, but Batman's always wearing a mask of some way. So when he's Batman, he's wearing this cowl that covers his face and it secures his identity and it hides who he is. And then also as Bruce Wayne, he's almost hiding who he is as Batman. He's this playboy figure that's out with tons of money and social and kind of brags a lot, but that's not who he is either. So he's almost always hiding something unless he's on his own in the Batcave or with Alfred. That's something I think people can relate to also. We have these ways of hiding ourselves, presenting ourselves in one way, but that's not really what's there. We see that a lot with social media, the lives that we construct and that we curate and that we show other people. That's often a very different life than the life we have and we're dealing with on our own.
How does his journey kind of like show his courage in confronting those things?
Sure. So I think going back to that storyline of him falling into that bat cave and really being terrified, over time, he almost in a cognitive behavioral therapy way, an exposure therapy, he exposed himself to this fear. There's a scene in Batman Begins, he's had that fall, and then later as an adult, he goes back into that well, and the bats just swirl around him, and he might be terrified, he might be fearful, but he stands there, and he's just letting it happen. And he eventually says, I want other people to feel the dread that I've felt. So he has taken this fear. He's gotten to a point where he's become resilient and he's exposed himself to this. So he's not necessarily scared by it. He recognizes in some ways that it's always scary when he thinks about being a kid and falling into that well, but he harnesses this fear and moves forward with it in a way and shows that resilience. And I think that's something we all either want to do ourselves or have done in different ways, whether that's realizing something really difficult in our lives and being scared by it and moving forward with it. There are just so many different ways that we see ourselves in this character.
And what is exposure therapy?
Cognitive behavioral therapy is a way of looking at what we might refer to as negative thoughts or behaviors that don't serve us very well. They might be automatic thoughts we have about ourselves being unlovable, being terrible, all kinds of things that we just continue to go back to in our minds. Cognitive behavioral therapy helps us get away from those or maybe change them a little bit, understand that there's a different way to think. Exposure therapy is often part of cognitive behavioral therapy. It's exposing yourself to something that might make you anxious, and you continue to expose yourself to it until that anxiety level comes down. So you might start and make what's called a hierarchy of fears, almost like a pyramid. And at the bottom might be something that makes you a little bit anxious, but you feel like you could handle exposing yourself to it. And you list all these things till the top point has the thing that is the scariest. So for example, let's say you are afraid of bats. The bottom level might be, let's say the word bat together if you were the therapist. And you grade your anxiety on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, 1 being not so bad. And you keep doing that until it's in the 1 to 2 range and you're ready to move to the next rung, which might be, all right, let's look at pictures online of bats. And then the next rung, okay, why don't we go ahead and go to the zoo and go watch the bats in the cage there? And then you can go up to, maybe you go to a zoo meeting where you can actually pet the bats or something like that. So it's gradually exposing yourself to something. And Bruce Wayne has done this a bit on his own, standing in that scene, holding his arms back and letting the bats just swirl all over. And then also creating an identity around being a bat in the night.
Is there anything else about Batman you'd like to touch on?
One other thing that's important to know when you ask about cognitive behavioral therapy and trauma in particular, Batman's had a lot of trauma, including the death of his parents. People will often say to me, how do I get rid of this feeling? How do I get away from it? And I will tell them, I don't think we should look at how do you leave this behind. This will always be a very sad part of your life. It will always be painful to think about. But how do we move along with it? And that's what Batman has done. He's moved along with that fear, with that trauma, and it drives him in a way to do what he does. So that's one thing that's important to know about this too.
I bet you that's so powerful too for people to hear, to see it in that different perspective.
Yeah, I think when people can realize, oh, it's okay to feel bad about this. I shouldn't feel differently, or, oh, maybe I can learn to move along with this. It can be really freeing.
Superman. Superman has always stood as a symbol of hope, but in the most recent Superman, we get a closer look at his story. Clark Kent is caught between two identities. He carries the expectation of a world that both depends on him and questions him. The film explores themes of responsibility, never fitting in completely, and the pressure to live up to standards.
Yeah, I have this debate with friends a lot, a very nerdy debate of who's better, Batman or Superman. I don't know the one's better, but I think with Superman, there are some really universal experiences that he has that I think everybody has. Not fitting in. Superman's born on another planet. He's never going to be a human. He's never really going to fit in. He tries to fit in by being Clark Kent, by being this guy that he dresses up as, with wearing glasses, being somewhat clumsy. That's not who he is. He is Superman. Wakes up every day that way from another planet, has abilities others don't have. He can do all kinds of things. He's never really going to fit in. Yet he also really cares about this group of people. He feels a responsibility to take care of them for various reasons. And I think that's another interesting part of Superman that people can identify with. Why am I driven to do what I'm doing? Is this because this is what I want to do? Or is this because somebody's told me I should do this? Or because I have the ability to do that? Oftentimes you might find athletes that are really good at what they do, but they don't actually want to necessarily do that. Or someone might be really good at, say, music, and they don't necessarily want to do that. Why are they doing it? So I think that's an interesting theme in Superman that really came out in the 2025 movie. You see in the beginning this message he gets from his Kryptonian parents to be in this place, to be on Earth, where, and then Lex Luthor kind of manipulates the last half of the message, you could live as a god, you could rule over everybody. Now that's not his parents saying he needs to do that, but there's a hint in there that he is better than people there, or he's someone who has abilities that other humans don't. So there's a question, does Superman do this because his parents have directed him and guided him to do that? And that's very much mimicking adolescence. When you're young, you have the rules, you have the guidance from your parents, ideally, your caregivers. And then over time, you learn how to make your own decisions. And what I really liked in this Superman 2025 movie was the Earth parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent, they let Superman be Superman. He doesn't have to do anything he doesn't want to. There's a moving scene where Jonathan Kent says to Clark, parents aren't for telling their kids who they're supposed to be. And this is who he is. He recognizes Clark is going to be Superman because Clark wants to do that. And then the mother comes out and says, oh, I polished your boots, knowing her son wants to go out and try to save the world. This isn't them saying, hey, man, get your boots on. Let's go. It's him being who he is. So I think there's that push and pull. Like, who are you? Who are your parents trying to tell you to be? What is it that you want to do? Why do you want to do it? So I think there are a lot of themes here that people can relate to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another thing with Superman is this burden of responsibility. He feels like he has to take care of people, and he wants to, but sometimes there is that burden. The people that he loves will get hurt because of the responsibilities he takes on to protect everyone. And I think people can relate to and identify with a burden of responsibility, whether that's having to care for elderly parents or having to care for people in your life that you love, but you wish sometimes you didn't have to. And I think that's also very human. So another line from Superman is, I'm just as human as everybody else. In some ways, he really is. He has these same emotional reactions that other people do.
What does this story reveal about the tensions we experience in our own lives?
When you talk about his parents and that idea of what his Kryptonian parents want for him to do, what does he want to do himself? What do his earthly parents want him to do? What does he want to do himself? There's always this push and pull. And I think as we grow up, we realize that we can have a life that maybe our parents don't want for us. Maybe they wanted something different. But that's part of growing up. You have to have the life that you want for yourself. I think we see this in a lot of the superheroes, but in Superman in particular, in this most recent movie and depiction of him, it's how does he want to go about having his life and what feels right to him? And that's important with our home lives, what feels right to us.
In Spider-Man Homecoming, we see that he's not just a superhero swinging between skyscrapers. Peter Parker lives in two worlds. In one where he's awkward, feeling like an outsider, learning to be responsible. And on the other, he's suddenly capable. Add to that the loss of his parents and an adolescent struck between being a kid and an adult, like most adolescents are, as they try to find their way in the world. However, because of his abilities, he might feel even more weight of that pull to the adult side.
With Spider-Man, what's important to realize is he's an adolescent. We now know adolescence actually goes into your early 20s. That's when the last part of your brain's formed, that prefrontal cortex that helps us with organizing and thinking about the future and consequences. Spider-Man is a lesson in adolescence and consequences, learning that some things happen because of what you do or don't do. That whole idea of with great power comes responsibility comes directly out of Spider-Man. His origin story, when he got bitten by that radioactive spider and he suddenly had all these powers, he tries to exploit that to get on TV or to earn a lot of money. And in one storyline, he's sewn his Spidey suit. He goes and he earns a lot of money wrestling. When he leaves, a security guard yells to him, hey, stop that guy, because there's a criminal that's just run by him. And he's basically like, that's not my job. It's not my problem. Later on, his Uncle Ben is killed, and he realizes that Uncle Ben was killed by the criminal he didn't stop. So he then learns, wow, with this great power comes responsibility. There are consequences to my actions, to not doing something. If he stays up late fighting crime, he's going to be sleepy in school. He might fail a test. If he fails a test, he might not pass the grade. If he ends up not getting pictures for work, he can get fired by J. Jonah Jameson. There's consequences here. So I think that's a big thing that we learn in Spider-Man. Just like in our lives, there are consequences to our actions. And we also might live between two worlds, the world we want to live in and then the world that we are compelled to be responsible in. So I think that's something that really plays out in the depictions of Spider-Man.
What does he teach us about responsibility?
Spider-Man teaches us a lot about responsibility. He's becoming more and more aware of what can happen to other people in his life because of his powers. In fact, in the last Spider-Man movie, No Way Home, he wants to talk to Doctor Strange and find out some way for people to forget who he is, who his identity is, what his identity is, because he doesn't want to put the people in his life at risk any longer. It's a burden to him. It's a responsibility to make sure everybody is okay. So he's trying to find some way to not have to worry about these people, but even more than that, some way to keep them safe. So I think he really does take on the responsibilities that he now realizes he has to shoulder, and that's something we can learn from too. We have responsibilities. We might not want to abide by them, but our choices have consequences. They can hurt other people sometimes. Sometimes it can help other people. And Spider-Man really teaches us, oh wow, if you stop and think, your actions really do affect people.
Living many lives can result in a lot of trauma and also a lot of growth. It can also mean breaking down a lot of stereotypes. Wolverine is a lesson in letting go of the guilt we carry from our past lives and anger.
Wolverine is a really complicated, interesting character. He's someone who was really created to be a weapon with these adamantium bones and claws that come out. And what's interesting is he actually has some depression and some alcoholism. I know we're not making diagnoses necessarily here, but it's important to bring these things up because Wolverine has had a lot of trauma. This dude has lived hundreds of years, seen a lot of people die, doesn't exactly get along well with his brother Sabretooth. He's got a lot of very difficult things in his life. In Deadpool versus Wolverine, we learn that he's drinking and drinking and drinking. He has an alcohol problem, and he's trying to dampen his emotions. That's something a lot of people do, whether with alcohol or substances or sex or other things. They try to push away their feelings. He was, in fact, going to a bar, and at a bar, when humans came and attacked the X-Men, he wasn't there to help, and he's not been able to forgive himself for that. So we already have this alcohol problem, and then he's got this massive depressive state, feeling like he's no good. He didn't help anybody. In fact, in another storyline, Old Man Logan, he was a pacifist. He didn't want to be hurting people. Mysterio, another villain, created this image and had Wolverine attack these enemies that were coming after him. And it turns out that they were actually the X-Men. So in another storyline, he's killed the X-Men. This character cannot let go of that. He can't forgive himself. And that's something that people often find, or I see in people, I should say, that they often can't forgive themselves for things. They feel terrible. As I mentioned, he was bred to be this weapon, essentially, created to be this weapon. And he sees himself that way. That's something that mirrors how I see people in therapy. A lot of times they feel they are terrible. They're bad. They hurt people. That's an internalized idea that they have. And I'm often trying to help them understand, why is that? Why do you think that? Or what makes you feel that way? Is there another way of thinking? Is there a way to move forward knowing it will always hurt to think about this? And is there a way to keep on going? So there's a lot here with Wolverine that is important and that we see in ourselves.
What's one way to look at those negative thoughts differently?
I might say, yeah, that really is hard to think about when you think about not being present for those people and giving that space, giving it space to actually, and when I say giving it space, I mean giving space for the feeling, for Logan to tell me, yeah, that is awful. I can't live with myself. And to let that be out there. That's something I often see with people, that they're afraid to even say these things. There's so much shame. So I might say something like, that sounds really, really hard to live with. And just let somebody acknowledge that it is. And just someone not being alone with that feeling anymore can really be amazing for people. Just so much of this is people feeling isolated or people feeling alone with something. And the idea in therapy is you don't have to be alone with it anymore. No, I didn't experience that loss with you. No, your therapist wasn't there at the moment. But you don't have to be alone with the way you feel about it anymore. And that can just be really, really relieving for people.
Deadpool. In Deadpool versus Wolverine, we often see Deadpool using humor as a coping mechanism. His constant sarcasm acts as an armor while watching people die around him. Laughter for Deadpool isn't always denial. It's a defense mechanism he used for a world that keeps taking, leaving him to wrestle with grief in the quiet spaces between the punchlines. The film highlights themes of depression, specifically in The Void.
I think the void in Deadpool vs. Wolverine was an amazing metaphor for depression. it's this place where people feel like they're banished. Often the way people feel isolated with depression, they feel like there's no connection to other people. The versions of the people that are there, they don't feel like the best versions. I know that was a big joke in the movie, that you have Elektra played by Jennifer Garner, and you had these old versions, or even Gambit, and he hadn't had a movie made. So there are all these versions that aren't quite right, and that's how people can experience depression. They don't feel quite right. What's around them doesn't feel quite right. There's that scene where Cassandra reaches into Deadpool's mind. Depression can often feel like something's just taken over, and he even starts thinking about negative or depressing experiences. And I know Cassandra's creating that, but it brings up the time Vanessa, his girlfriend, was telling him, you need to snap out of this. You weren't considered a serious superhero. You didn't make it, but I want to get up with you. I want to be there with you. And then suddenly Cassandra turns it and twists it into something even more negative, where Vanessa then says, you don't matter. And it's really negative. And that's the way depression can really grab a hold of somebody. Suddenly everything's negative. You don't matter. You don't have any value. You don't mean anything. These are almost criteria for definition. Having a feeling of worthlessness, feeling like you're not happy, and having a low mood, not getting pleasure from things. This is all in the void. And then when Deadpool kind of gets his head out of Cassandra's hand, if you will, he says, I tasted your hand. It tasted like hate. Sometimes in depression, people really can hate themselves. They can feel worthless. That is one of the criteria. So I think it's a really good metaphor. And then at the end of that scene, Goliath comes chasing after Deadpool. And that's another thing people feel in depression. Like, this just keeps coming after them and coming after them and coming after them. They can't escape it. So I think that's a really great metaphor for being in a depressive state.
Yeah. Can humor be used as a coping strategy?
Absolutely. Humor can be used as a coping strategy. Deadpool does that really well. There are times when you might cross into, okay, this is not so much coping anymore. Like if it's at the expense of other people, or if it gets in the way of you actually getting help, if it's damaging, if it hurts relationships. But it can be really positive. It can be a way of kind of getting a different perspective and snapping you out of something that might feel so overwhelming. But making a funny comment or hearing someone use humor can kind of bring you back, like, okay, what are we doing here? What do we need to do? It can also be something that helps you not feel so overwhelmed and crushed by what is happening in front of you, so that you can move forward. So there are a lot of ways that humor can be mature. A lot of Deadpool's humor is immature, but that also makes people laugh, and then they can go ahead and deal with whatever the serious thing is that they need to. But I always say Deadpool's not going to die. He is, we've seen him regenerate his lower half. We've seen him do all kinds of things. That's incredibly sad when you think about it. Everybody in his life will pass away. Wolverine will be there, so that's kind of an interesting pairing. Like, they'll continue to go off into the sunset together. But Deadpool's an interesting character for that reason. There's this balance of humor and then incredible sadness.
How do we know when it becomes an unhealthy coping mechanism?
I think, is it interfering with the process of getting help and moving on? I think another thing would be, is it aggressive? Is it self-deprecating? I know that people sometimes will make jokes, oh, I'm so terrible at this. But that inner monologue we have with ourselves can really actually affect us. So self-deprecating humor can get to a point where you really are reiterating this narrative that you're not good at something. So I think that can also be a time when maybe it's not super helpful. These are the kind of things you can look at in therapy.
Iron Man. Tony Stark is celebrated as a genius, billionaire, and a hero, but beneath the confidence is a man battling addiction and narcissism. In Iron Man 3, we see him experience panic attacks, sudden, overwhelming reminders that trauma doesn't disappear just because you survived it. He reminds us that anyone, including superheroes, can get panic attacks.
Absolutely. That was one of my favorite scenes in the Iron Man films, is Tony Stark is sitting down, kids are coming up to him asking for his autograph with a crayon, and he suddenly feels like, wait a minute, what's going on? What's going on? He does the analysis of himself, and the analysis is, you're having a panic attack. He's getting short of breath. He's feeling his chest tightness. He's feeling like he might die in that moment. This is very much a panic attack. It can happen and escalate and suddenly come to a peak in 10 minutes and eventually go away. But I love how the analysis is you're having a panic attack. It's like, me? Yeah, anybody can get a panic attack. Just because you're narcissistic and think you're better than most people doesn't mean you're not going to have a panic attack. So I think that's an interesting storyline there. In terms of the other mental health pieces, narcissism, meaning one is really, how would I best define this? When people talk about narcissism and Tony Stark, it's these traits of thinking you're deserving of certain respect, thinking you are only to associate with certain crowds, that you're very important. There's this seeking unlimited power, beauty, wealth, these type of traits, and he has them to some degree. Not necessarily full-blown narcissistic personality disorder. And personality disorders is when you experience the world vastly differently than most people in your culture do. He might have a lot of these traits, but he's not a malignant narcissist. Malignant narcissism is more on the end of serial killer, someone who just uses people to get what they want, use them as pawns. He's not that. In fact, he's Iron Man. He's out there trying to help other people. What I find interesting about Tony is his family life. His father was fairly narcissistic. His father was going to create this company, did create this company, but could only get it to a certain place because of the limited technology. And in the videos Tony watches, his father says, "You're my greatest creation. You're going to take this technology and bring everything forward." That's not exactly what a kid wants to hear from their parent, that I'm here to continue your legacy, that I'm an extension of you. And that's often what happens with narcissistic parents. Sometimes to be seen in that kind of environment, a person adopts the narcissistic traits. So Tony might have it from that father. There's also the idea that a narcissistic parent emotionally neglects a child. So they have this vulnerable insecurity inside, and the narcissism covers that up. So it's interesting because Tony really does have both a visible vulnerability with his heart, and then he has this vulnerability inside him. And most narcissists do have this fragility, and they need to be propped up so that that fragility is not revealed to other people.
What are some signs we can look for when with our loved ones with narcissism?
If you're looking for signs that people have narcissism, do you see things like they're feeling that they deserve certain treatments and they're not willing to associate with certain people because they're above those people? Or is there this pursuit of unlimited power and wealth or beauty, or do they think people are envious of their own power and wealth and beauty? So I think these are the kind of things you can look for in narcissism. But emotionally, what you can look for is, do you feel crowded out of a room by somebody? Do you feel like someone takes up all the space? There's no space for you, that it's not possible to have this person actually see you and recognize who you are. That is something that I see a lot of. And people feeling like they're an extension of their parents, that's something that's pretty common with narcissism. It doesn't mean it's only from a narcissistic parent, but oftentimes parents don't realize their kids, whether as young kids, teenagers, young adults, they have their own way of wanting to live their lives. They're not here to live the life that we as parents might want for them. They have to live their own life. So I think that's really important to realize, okay, how do I learn to be who I am? And how can I do that sometimes with my parents' support, sometimes in spite of the parents that you have, or despite the parents that you have? And that can be really hard. Those are the kind of things I talk to people about in therapy quite frequently.
I know people they can only control how they react to things and not what other people, and dealing with a narcissist. What are some ways that someone can remind themselves or like think about in those kind of situations?
So there's a technique called gray rocking, which has been written about in the New York Times and other places. It's the idea that when you're around somebody who's a narcissist, you act almost like a gray rock on purpose. You don't share much about yourself because it saves you from the disappointment of someone not really seeing you. It saves you from the hurt of someone not really making efforts to understand you, or even a narcissist taking your accomplishments as their own. It prevents all that. So you can think about, okay, how can I be in this space with this person and really just not engage in a way that's going to make me feel like I'm taken over. The other thing to do is realize that most narcissists are really fragile people. So you're trying to prop them up, whether that's with praise or doing the things they want. because it feels very dire to you that oh, this person's going to fall apart if I don't do these things. So you can think about that and think about how you might feel when that happens.
Going back to like the panic attacks and stuff, what are some grounding tools that folks can use when they're in the middle of one?
If you find you are having a panic attack, there are some things you can do. The main thing is a grounding technique, and that means just reestablishing for yourself where you are. You try to tell yourself, what are three things you see? What are three things you hear? And three things you can move, body parts you can move. The 3-3-3 rule. That can be really helpful. The other thing to do, and I know it's hard to do this in a panic attack, but you can try to breathe in a way. I know everybody says just breathe. That really never helps. But if you breathe in through your nose for a count of, say, 3, you exhale through your mouth for twice as long. And it's that exhale that really helps you feel calm. You can even practice this before bed. You can practice it when you're going into a meeting. But inhaling through your nose for a count of X, exhaling through your mouth for a count of 2X, that combined with grounding can really, really be helpful. So if you start to feel it come on, even though panic attacks can hit like that, if you start to feel it come on, start to breathe in this way. Start to say, okay, I'm here in my office. I'm looking around. I'm talking to Micah. I'm seeing the tree outside. You just really ground yourself that way. Cool scenes to me in Iron Man was in the beginning when he first meets Ho Jensen, and that character asks him, do you have children? Do you have a family? And Tony says, no, no, no. And Ho says, so basically you're a man who has everything and nothing. And that really impacts Tony. And I think that that's a pivotal moment in his life. And I think we all have these moments in our lives where like, oh, that really changed something really drastically for me, how I think about life or how I go about life. And even though he might be narcissistic, he's able to realize, whoa, there's some meaning in actually doing good in the world and helping other people. So I think that's really important. I'm sure that a lot of the audience will say, well, Tony, I don't know if he's narcissistic. He's not evil. He's not this. You don't have to be evil to have narcissistic traits. And narcissistic traits aren't necessarily always terrible. There's a belief that people who ascend to CEO levels have some narcissistic traits. He is there as Iron Man to help other people. So I want to be very clear. I'm not saying he's a terrible narcissist, and just to put that out there.
The Hulk. We see a quiet scientist with a force inside him he cannot fully control. When his anger spikes, he transforms into the Hulk. As Hulk, he has strength driven by raw emotion. Each episode follows him drifting from town to town, trying to do good while fearing that the very power he hoped for would help others instead of destroying everything around him.
Yeah. I love the show, The Incredible Hulk, from back in the day. When I was a kid, I was terrified, particularly by an episode where the Hulk is fighting another Hulk. But what I love about it now as a psychiatrist and a therapist is Bruce Banner, the character, was experimenting on his emotions and trying to figure out why in a moment when his family got into a car accident, why did he not become super strong the way some people do and get that adrenaline rush? And why couldn't he rip the car door off and save his family? So this is a man in mourning. He's really traumatized. And he does these experiments with gamma radiation and exposure to the sun. And as we know, it all goes wrong. And he turns green when he gets really angry. It becomes really big. But I really love that he was trying to figure out, why couldn't I do something? This man is mourning. And a lot of people have grief. We are inevitably going to lose loved ones. So I think there's a grieving individual trying to figure out, why couldn't he do something? I think it reflects what I see in real life, that sometimes people keep thinking, why couldn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? Why didn't I do that? And it's a way to not integrate into your life that this person is no longer here. These people are no longer here physically. And I think that's something that often gets in the way of people grieving. It's a natural thing, but it also helps us not to feel sad. So I think we see that illustrated in this character. The other thing that I find really interesting is anger is one of the emotions that many people I see really struggle with. Now, whether that's because they were told they shouldn't feel angry by teachers or by parents or caregivers or religion, it's really an emotion people struggle with. And I think that's cool that the Hulk is really angry, and people are scared of anger because people are scared of anger. It's not wrong to have these emotions. It's what do we do with them? And interestingly, the Hulk saves a lot of people. People are scared about this big green guy, but he does do some good things. So similarly in life, anger can drive us to do good things. So I think that's another part of the story that's very interesting.
How can we talk about, or like, what's a frame set mind that someone can have when they're talking about anger without feeling like they're going to become the Hulk?
It's funny. I know we're talking about the Incredible Hulk, but this is when I'll bring in Harry Potter. One line I love from the Harry Potter books and the movies is when Dumbledore tells Harry in the first book, Harry's referring to Voldemort and says, "Oh, he who must not be named." And Voldemort is not spoken. Dumbledore says, "Just say his name. He has more power over you that way when you don't say his name. When you say he who must not be named, or you know who." And it really does take away the power there. Similarly, with our emotions, being able to say, "I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm really, really upset," it can take the power away in a sense. You can start to control it, very much like what Bruce Banner was trying to do. You can control your emotions instead of feeling like they control you. You don't have to be scared of them. So I think just starting by stating what you feel. Ideally, you could see a therapist or talk to a doctor about it. But even just saying to yourself, "I'm really angry about this," writing it down, writing it in a journal, letting it come out in a way that doesn't feel super scary. It might feel scary at first, but you suddenly realize me writing this on a paper doesn't actually cause somebody harm. I might be angry at somebody else. That anger shouldn't actually hurt them. What hurts them is what you do with the anger. So we're human beings. We're going to be angry. We're going to be upset. So I think realizing that, that's really important. The last thing I'll say, with all of these characters and with all the people here listening and watching, I think the important thing is we're humans. We have emotions. We're going to have emotions. And being able to talk to a therapist about this, if you can be really helpful because you don't feel as alone with them. I think that's what I see the most. That's one thing I see most often is people feel so alone with their feelings. And when they don't have to feel that way anymore, they just feel better. They can go about being in their lives the way they want to in a much better way. So I continue to encourage people to talk to people if you need help.
Thank you so much for doing this. Where can people find your latest works, your videos?
Sure. Go to YouTube under Dr. Bender and you can see me there. I really encourage you to please like and subscribe there because I love doing these videos and I'm trying to do more and that will help me continue to do them. So I'm on YouTube and then also on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok with a lesser audience there because I really do focus more on the YouTube, but you can find me there. And my website is drericbender.com, all spelled out, DOCTORERICBENDER. And I hope to interact with you in the future.